So it doesn't make sense to me that a fire would cause a building to just suddenly collapse.
No, it's completely unprecedented. It doesn't make sense to anybody, least of all the firefighters who wanted to go up and put those fires out. Listen to Dan Rather on CBS.
What you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building. It's amazing. Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Whoa, what was that, Dan? Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down?
You heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
More knowledge. Well, listen to the BBC. They announced the collapse of this building 20 minutes before it even happened.
Using Wi-Fi without NordVPN could mean sharing your private stuff with more people than you think. NordVPN. Online security starts with a click.
One of the things that I've learned over the years is there are so many things that we've been told are one way, but on closer examination, it ain't necessarily so. And in this video, I'm going to be finding out about what really, really happened on 9/11. Hi everybody, thank you so much for coming along to my channel. Please subscribe, comment, like, all that business. Share this video far and wide. I am joined by Richard Gage. Now, before I introduce him, please also you can follow me on Twitter, CryptoRichYT. Join my official Telegram announcements channel. And if you're watching this on YouTube, come and support my work on Rumble and ODYSEE and 3Speak. You can also get podcasts on Podbean, but then you won't see the visuals. Okay, Richard, thank you so much for making yourself available.
You're welcome. Great to be here.
Yes, thank you. You are a San Francisco Bay Area architect, member of the American Institute of Architects, and founder and former CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And you're now leading the charge for an investigation into the World Trade Center, like a new investigation, like what really happened with your courageous wife Gail. And people can reach you. Your website, as you can see at the back there, is richardgage911.org. Did I get that right, Richard?
I think so. You
Okay.
got it.
Very good.
Thanks, Rich.
You're so welcome. Now, I remember 9/11, and I remember watching on the BBC News the day that it happened. And then I remember like a day or so later, they found the passports of the alleged hijackers. Everything else got turned to dust. But those passports, not only were they like in pristine condition, they weren't buried under all that rubble and dust. So it did strike me a little bit odd. And then the strike at the Pentagon building, there was no fuselage. Where's the airplane fuselage? Because it takes ages to remove them. Take it away, Richard.
Yes, well, those are questions answered by others. And what we're about today is the explosive destruction of the World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11. All three of them, 1, 2, and 3. So let's show you about the third tower today. This is pretty darn important, after all.
Is this Building 7?
Yeah, this is Building 7, World Trade Center Building 7.
Sorry, Richard, excuse me. I may interrupt you, right, at various points.
You go right ahead.
Okay, so Building 7 collapsed about 5 p.m. that day. The Twin Towers were about noonish, around that time, if I recall correctly. And Building 7 didn't have an airplane hit it. It just crashed.
Well, that's what we're going to be looking at. Most architects and engineers don't even know about the third worst structural failure in modern history. Of course, after the Twin Towers.
Yeah.
So we've got 2 planes brought down 3 buildings, actually. And so we go all around the country to architecture and engineering conferences here in America. Mm-hmm. And we present them this building. And I'll show you what happens to it. But here it is, standing just fine next to the tallest buildings in the world at the time they were built, 1973. And, the Building 7 is half the height of the Twin Towers, but it'd be the tallest building in most of our states. Look at it competing with all the other buildings in New York. And then it shows you how mammoth the towers were. And you're right. No plane hit this building.
And
it was about...
I'm near London, and I think the tallest building in London has got about 50 stories. So it'd be one of the tallest in London as well. And it just looks like that.
Yeah, and London has some pretty high skyscrapers. So I didn't realize that Building 7 would compete over there as well.
Yeah.
It's about a football field in length north of the North Tower. And here it is standing just fine, of course. And even after the towers come down that morning, we have Building 7 standing and doing just fine. It did have some damage to the south side, hit by some of the large structural members ejected out of the Twin Towers, which we'll get to another time. Because we'll be focusing today on the evidence for the explosive destruction of Building 7 and extreme heat. Now, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked by Congress to explain these collapses to the American people, they said that damage to the building wasn't a causative factor in its collapse. But we have a collapse anyway. And we'll look at what was a causative factor, but let's look at this collapse first. As you can see in the upper left is the east penthouse, and it comes down first, and in an isolated incident. And then 6 seconds later, this happens. So we really have to ask ourselves some hard questions, like, what does that look like? You ever seen that before on TV, Rich?
No.
The old hotels in Las Vegas here in America controlled demolition. And so we had to have another reason besides that, because that involves somebody getting into the building prior to 9/11 and placing charges and so forth. Well, here's Shyam Sunder of the NIST. He's the co-project leader of the NIST report on this building. Let's listen.
What we found was that uncontrolled building fires caused an extraordinary event. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fire.
Fires. Okay, well, if it came down by fires, maybe we should look at those fires. Let's do that. Here are some of the fires, and these are the only fires that we have photographic or video evidence of in the building. And they're fairly small, scattered, and not very hot. So, in fact, they're burnt out on the 12th floor up here, where NIST says the worst fires were at about the time of the collapse. And so you can see they're burnt out. In fact, there might be some fire way down here in the West End at 3:50 p.m. Well, they have a computer model at 4 p.m. showing those fires raging around the northeast corner, completely violated by the photos that we have very clear view of those fires. So NIST has made an extraordinary claim and backed it up with a fraudulent computer simulation. So right off the bat, we have all kinds of doubts here. But let's go on. Let's see what kinds of fires have burned in skyscrapers all around the world, actually, and how they have fared. Well, none of these fireproofed steel frame skyscrapers have come down due to fire. Not one of them. And there are dozens and dozens and dozens of them before 9/11 and after 9/11, where we have completely torched buildings. And not one of these came down either. You might recognize one of those, Rich.
Oh, yes. Grenfell.
Yeah, Grenfell Tower on the left, completely torched. People died. The building has been remodeled now, hasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And Richard, I mean, I'm not an architect, I'm a social worker, but like a fire takes ages to go through a building. The larger the building, the longer it would take to go through. So it doesn't make sense to me that a fire would cause a building to just suddenly collapse the way that it did in that video you showed us earlier.
No, it's completely unprecedented. It doesn't make sense to anybody, least of all the firefighters who wanted to go up and put those fires out, because in these that's what they were doing in these kind of fires here. But they were told not to fight the fire in Building 7. Well, let's look and see if it wasn't fire that brought this building down, what might it have been? We have a series of known controlled demolitions on the left, Building 7 on the right. Is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives, especially since fire, the official cause of this building's collapse, has never in history brought down a steel frame skyscraper? So, yeah, it should have been the first hypothesis that NIST considered, but no, it was relegated to a set of very frequently asked questions put on their website 10 years later. So, when the pressure mounted, so we have to ask ourselves, does it have any of the features of a typical controlled demolition? Let's take them one by one. Do we have a sudden onset of destruction? Well, the building is standing at rest, and all of a sudden, it's in uniform downward motion. Listen to Dan Rather on CBS.
And what you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building. It's amazing. Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Whoa, what was that, Dan? Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down? Well, he's using his intuition here. In fact, we all have a frame of reference for these things, that controlled demolitions. And that's exactly what it looks like. And so NIST had quite a challenge on their hands to explain this away as a result of fire, especially since it contains feature number 2 of controlled demolition, a straight down symmetrical collapse into the building's footprint. Let's watch from West Street. Pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. How do we achieve that symmetry? Well, they have to take out all the core columns at once, within a fraction of a second of each other, followed about a second later by the perimeter columns, and then repeat that floor by floor. Any deviation in that pattern, and the building will begin to tip over. Do these fires have that capability to take those columns out precisely and synchronistically timed? Well, if you don't do it just right, controlled demolitions can go awry. Like this one, where the explosives didn't go off and it just rolls off. Or this one, where they stop and the building is standing there and somebody has to go in there and fix that dud that went off. Buildings that are damaged on one side, they fall over, like this building in Asia. And apparently, according to NIST, Building 7 was damaged in the northeast corner due to those fires. It should have fallen to the northeast. Or if it was damaged by the North Tower, which is to the south of World Trade Center 7, it should have fallen to the south. There's no possible way in which all those columns could be taken out at once by those fires that we saw. So how fast is the building coming down? Well, let's look at the work of David Chandler, physics teacher, who documents very carefully that the building is coming down at freefall acceleration. Well, that's as fast as a bowling ball falling from the sky. The bowling ball had no resistance under it, which is how it can fall that fast. This building had 40,000 tons of structural steel in it, designed to keep it from going anywhere, 3 to 5 times stronger than it needed to be because of the safety factors involved. So this building is massive and incredible and over-designed for a number of reasons we won't even get into. But NIST actually started out denying that it came down by free fall. Then they were embarrassed, publicly embarrassed, into admitting that, yes, it did, you're right, come into free fall in a technical conference that they gave where members of AE 9/11 Truth challenged them. And so they acknowledge and actually publish in their paper, because they said, yeah, you're right, we'll have to fix that. They acknowledge free fall, which is startling in and of itself, but they don't acknowledge the implications of free fall. What are those? That all those columns had to have been taken out at once. If any one of those 80 columns, 81 columns on each floor gave any resistance, the building would have not fallen at free fall. It would have slowed down, but it didn't do that. So can these fires take out all those columns? We don't think so. We look at feature number 5, total dismemberment of the structural steel frame. This was a 47-story moment-resisting steel frame and braced steel frame building also, where the column, moment-resisting means the columns and beams are rigidly welded one to another. And the X-braces you saw are in addition to that. This building, yet though, fell into a pile 6 stories tall like a house of cards. This is not what we see in natural collapses. What we see is a building that has fallen. Typically, it will fall over. We recognize it as a building in the aftermath. The columns and beams are not severed one from another. The concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder. They don't fall like a house of cards. Are these fires capable of causing that then? No, fires would just create a natural collapse, like something like we just saw. So, just saw here.
They wouldn't have got hot enough to melt the steel beams for it to collapse that quickly. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. And I'll explain that in a moment because we're going to be looking at that. But first, let's see if there's any witnesses of explosions. NIST says there were none. And yet we have half a dozen right here. Here's Daryl, a medical student, interviewed on 1010 WINS radio in New York that evening.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. And then about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground.
The building followed after the sound of a clap of thunder, the shockwave ripping through the building and the windows busting out. Not those things happening as a result of the building falling. Again and again, you're going to hear this specific order of events. Listen to Daryl, a medical student. Excuse me. That was Daryl. This is Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic.
You heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
Okay, no doubt in his mind, nor this gentleman, Bill Rosati, from what he saw.
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere.
A big flash, and then the building coming down. Okay, well, how about Richard Rotan's deputy director of the Emergency Management Office, or Center, which was on the 23rd floor. Listen to his experience inspecting the building.
Then he had to go into that building to assess it.
You could hear the building creak above us. You could hear things fall. You could hear the fire burning. You could see columns just hanging from the upper floors, gaping holes in the floors up above us. There was an elevator car that was blown out of its shaft and was down the hall.
An elevator blown out of its shaft that was down the hall? Well, the elevators are on the interior of the building. And he clarified later that those elevators, that elevator cab was blown 30 feet away from its original hoistway. Well, the damage to the south side of the building was down here. So that damage and the dangling columns up above him inside the building could not have been a result of the damage to the exterior either. And he would have described that as huge daylight opening in the exterior of the building, which he did not. Other witnesses of explosions include Barry Jennings, who, along with Michael Hess, Mayor Giuliani's attorney, had been called to a meeting on the 23rd floor in the emergency center. And they didn't realize that the building had been evacuated after the two planes hit the towers, but before they came down. And this is their experience after they got up to the 23rd floor and were trying to get out of the building.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions.
What's on the sound?
Like a boom. Like an explosion.
More than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run.
Information of bombs? Well, bombs like this heard in the late morning of 9/11 in the vicinity of Building 7 by these first responders?
Yeah, here's one of the guys. He can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
NIST said there were no witnesses of bombs or explosions. You just heard them. So we have to say, okay, if this was a controlled demolition, then people would know about it in advance because you have to prepare these, not just days, but many weeks and months prior. And interestingly, we learn that Building 7, by the evacuation numbers that NIST provides, it was only half occupied, very interestingly. And so we also have to ask ourselves, who knew what when? Well, let's look at Deputy Chief Nick Visconti. We're moving the command post over this way. That building's coming down. Wait a minute. How does he know the building's going to come down? It has a few small scattered fires in it, and no steel frame fire protected structure has ever come down due to fire. Well, okay. What about Chief Hayden? What did he know?
Well, we had our special operations people set up surveying instruments to monitor and see if there was any movement in the building. We were concerned of the possibility of collapse of the building. And we had a discussion with one particular engineer there. And we asked him if we allowed it to burn, could we anticipate a collapse? And if so, how soon? And it turned out that he was pretty much right on the money, that he said in its current state, you have about 5 hours.
What? Not only did he announce the collapse of this building, which is unprecedented, but the time in which it comes down, about 5 hours, and it did come down in 5 hours. That's pretty extraordinary. The prediction, of course, could only have been made with foreknowledge, and we don't get to know who that engineer was. It is kept from us, and that's one lucky guess. Or, of course, he was on the inside, as were these mysterious construction workers walking away from Building 7, hearing an explosion over their shoulder, looking back at the building, and then looking straight into the CNN camera and saying this.
Keep your eye on that building as they coming down. Building's about to blow up. Move it back. All right, guys.
We are walking back. There's a building about to blow up. On flame. Debris coming down.
What? The building is about to blow up? Flame and debris coming down? Not only is it going to come down, the building, but now it's going to blow up. Well, how do they know that? And how do they know it's going to come down? Well, what did Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic, hear before he heard those explosions? He and others are held back about 6 blocks from the building because they were told it was going to come down. And here's what he hears on a radio held in the hands of who he believed to be a Red Cross worker.
At the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1.
What? Do fires bring buildings down to countdowns? What is really going on here? This is pretty darn incredible. Examples of foreknowledge. Well, listen to the BBC. They announced the collapse of this building 20 minutes before it even happened.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago, I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy.
Sketchy indeed. The building is still standing behind her, and she had just announced its collapse. So what's going on here? Well, the BBC apologizes for this grievous error, citing the confusing events of the day. Does that make them psychic? I mean, you got to do something about your news service over there. They're awfully, really, really good. Well, even better than them. CNN announces the collapse of a 50-story building that morning. That went down at 10:45, they say. Well, there was no other 50-story building or 47-story building other than Building 7 that came down. There was no other building that came down. There were some badly damaged buildings. But had this building come down at that time, we may not have any photographic or video evidence of it because of the massive dust cloud released when the Twin Towers came down just earlier, like 15, 20 minutes earlier. So maybe it was supposed to come down at that time. And maybe those mysterious construction workers walking away from Building 7, hearing that explosion and saying the building's going to come down, maybe they were walking back from the building and having fixed a dud that didn't go off at the right time. That would connect some dots for us. We don't exactly know what happened, so we're going to go and look at some of the experts, like Danny Jawenko, one of the top European controlled demolition firms.
Danny Jawenko is the expert on this in Europe. What did he say?
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten, zeker weten. Er is nagekomen. Dit is in opdracht gebeurd. Het heeft een team gedaan van experts.
A team of experts did this. Interesting, a hired job. Okay, that's very helpful from a professional in the field. How about Kamal Obeid? A localized failure in a steel frame building like WTC7 cannot cause a catastrophic collapse like a house of cards without a simultaneous and patterned loss of several of its columns at key locations within the building. Does that sound like something fires can do? So this got the attention of Professor Leroy Hulsey, one of the top forensic structural engineers in the country. And he's asking the question, you know, if this building can come down, and there are hundreds of other similarly designed buildings like this, if they can come down at free fall on top of the firefighters and the occupants in the building, we got a serious problem. We got to follow this up and find out exactly what happened. So he assembled a team of PhD students, and he analyzed this at the University of Alaska, and with two competing software platforms, finite element analysis, to corroborate each other, and they did. And they both found out that, gosh, if we take out columns 79, 80, and 81, as NIST claims failed first, you would have what we intuitively know, that the building would begin to tip over. So then they said, well, gosh, what do we have to do to get the building to behave like the video did? Well, they had to take out all the columns in the building, floor by floor, and then exactly that is what happens. In fact, you can see it here compared to the video in the middle and compared to NIST's computer simulation on the right, where even when they had 6 years to back engineer this computer model, they couldn't get it to behave like the building. They had to release 400 structural steel connections every second, like ultimately the team from the University of Alaska did, because it didn't fail when they just it didn't fail symmetrically when they took out those 3 columns. And the building, NIST's computer model, stops after 2 seconds. You don't even see it after that, because they had to stop it because it was beginning to tip over the entire building and crumple up like a beer can. So they stop it, so we don't see that. So what are the findings of the Halsey study? Fire did not cause the collapse of this building. The temperatures were not high enough to cause the weakening of the steel framing. To answer your question, Rich, earlier, no, the temperatures were not high enough. And primarily because, but not only, the steel members are fireproofed. They have 2 hours of fire protection on them, meaning those beams could survive for 2-hour fires. But there's only enough fire in one area to burn 20 minutes, and even as NIST acknowledges. But also, they found that the thermal expansion did not result in a loss of support for the beams and the girders. And the collapse of this building was a global failure involving what? The near simultaneous failure of all the columns in the building, and not a progressive collapse as claimed by NIST. Well, that's very helpful, and that went around to engineering circles as far and as wide as we could send it, and caused quite a stir in the industry. So now we have to ask, well, since the University of Alaska didn't speculate as to what could have taken out all those columns at once, we have to ask ourselves, what could? And we look back to FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Association, who did the report before NIST came in and took over. And by the way, throughout this entire Appendix C to the Building Performance Assessment Team report in 2002. And none of this information you're about to hear was included in the NIST report. This is, again, scientific fraud, because it includes a metallurgical examination of the steel from both Building 7 and the Twin Towers. What they see? Never before observed eutectic reactions, intergranular melting, capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese, like you see in this piece of World Trade Center 7 steel that they examined, with silver dollar-sized holes. Go ahead, Rich.
What are eutectic reactions?
This is when you add sulfur to thermite, which is the only thing that can create this, because office fires don't get a quarter these temperatures typically. So you add sulfur to thermite, and we'll look at this carefully, and you get thermate. It becomes much more effective at cutting through steel. That's what a eutectic is.
Right.
Pretty much on the money there. Some metallurgist will be more specific, but they documented rapid oxidation and sulfidation with liquid iron. Wait a minute, liquid iron? What's that? That's molten iron. That's 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit iron. About half of that, 1,500 degrees Celsius. So we don't have anything in the official narrative that can achieve these temperatures. Nothing, even close, which is why they don't talk about it, which is why NIST threw this examination of the steel out of their report when they submitted it in 2004. Well, 2005 for the Twin Towers, 2008 for the Building 7. Sulfur formed during this hot corrosion attack on the steel. So now they know where the eutectic came from, because sulfur is added to thermite to become thermate. Much more effective. But they don't come to that conclusion in writing in their report, because that's a hot potato. Cited by the New York Times as being the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation. Yet it's ignored by NIST. The presence of sulfur, they speculate, sulfur must have come from the gypsum board. Well, gypsum board has never turned around and attacked the steel that it is designed to protect for the last 100 years.
Well, this was a particularly vindictive gypsum board, though, Richard.
Yeah, it sure was. And it's never done that. And, you know, we can do, and some have. John Cole, civil engineer, burned a whole bunch of gypsum board. Oh, look at this. That was Missy. Oh my gosh, that rarely happens in the middle of an interview.
Oh, that made the entire video.
I'm glad. And so, Jonathan Barnett, one of the authors of the FEMA report, says steel members in the debris pile appear to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures. There's one problem with this. What does it take to evaporate steel? 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, about 2,000 Celsius.
Jeez.
So, gosh, they don't. No wonder they didn't want to talk about any of this. But here, Jonathan Barnett said it. In fact, it's documented here by Abolhassan Astani Azal, a structural engineer from the UC Berkeley. And he had a Science Foundation grant to study the steel. And he's documenting the melting of girders. He doesn't know how it happened. It can happen by office fire. He doesn't even speculate. Nobody speculates how molten metal is dripping out of the material held in the crab claw excavators. Well, guess what? We know by the color of molten steel or iron what its temperature is. We're exceeding 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, 1,370 degrees Celsius. How do we get such temperatures? Not from jet fuel, by the way. Jet fuel burns about 600 degrees in open air.
It might have been
we don't have
all those treasury records and secret spy agency files that burned furiously, all that paper.
Well, you're referring to the tenants of the World Trade Center 7, probably, which includes the CIA, the FBI, the IRS, the Department of Defense, DOD. We have a lot of very high-profile clients in the tenants in this building. And yeah, so that may or may not have something to do with why Building 7 was taken down. We can speculate a lot about that. Office fires in the very worst test conditions get to be 1,830 degrees. So still, we're half the temperatures associated with molten iron. Nothing in the official narrative can possibly account for these temperatures. But what can? Could thermite account for it? What is thermite anyway?
An incendiary used by the military, thermite is a compound of iron oxide and aluminum, which when ignited sustains an extreme heat reaction, creating molten iron. In just 2 seconds, thermite can reach temperatures over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, quite enough to liquefy steel. We know that open-air fires cannot burn hot enough to melt steel, but metal had melted at the base of the towers. Appendix C of the FEMA report describes sulfur residues on the World Trade Center steel. The New York Times called this the deepest mystery of all. Sulfur slightly lowers the melting point of iron, and iron oxide and iron sulfide had formed on the surface of the structural steel. Sulfur used with thermite is called thermate, producing even faster results.
Well, maybe we're getting somewhere here, Rich, because if thermite were used, well, that would explain the presence of sulfur, and nothing else could. And it would explain the incredible temperatures, 4,000 to 5,000 degrees. Thus, the evaporation and melting of steel and iron. And iron, it would specifically explain the presence of iron, not steel in this case, but molten iron, elemental iron. Well, we have it in the forms you just saw, all of which is the evidence of ignited thermite. Is there any evidence of ignited thermite in the World Trade Center dust? Yeah, lots of it. And found by who? The U.S. Geological Survey in their particle atlas of the World Trade Center dust that they produced in 2005. What did they find? Billions of previously molten, meaning 1,500 degrees Celsius, iron meaning the byproduct of thermite, microspheres, meaning that they were produced under pressure because aerosolized liquids form themselves into spheres because of the surface tension. So all of this can be explained quite easily. And in fact, the EPA didn't explain it, but they said it is a signature component of the World Trade Center dust. It's used to distinguish World Trade Center dust from common office building dust. Wow, but you don't know where it came from? You didn't figure that out? Somebody figured it out somewhere. Because up to 6% of some of these samples are what? Previously molten iron microspheres, amounting to about 4 tons altogether throughout all the World Trade Center dust. So R.J. Lee group does analysis on the dust also, and they find that these are formed during the event, not before, by the iron workers welding the building together, not afterward by the iron workers cutting the building apart, but during the event. So what could produce billions of previously molten iron microspheres during the event? Well, we could do an experiment. Experiment is the arbiter of competing hypotheses. Let's do one. Let's burn some thermite. A small amount here producing what look like thousands of sparks, but which cool and fall into the pan as previously molten iron microspheres throughout all the World Trade Center dust. So all of that was evidence of ignited thermite. Is there any evidence of unignited thermite in the World Trade Center dust? Yeah, team of 8 international scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen do their own analysis of 7 independently collected samples, and they find these curious red-gray chips. They thought they were paint, but unlike paint, they're attracted to a magnet, and they get real curious then because this paint doesn't have that much iron in it. So the red-gray chips are taken into a study with X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy, and what do they find? Quantities of aluminum and iron oxide, the ingredients of thermite. So they have the signature of thermite in these red-gray chips. They get real curious now. They zoom in 50,000 times, and they find nano-sized particles of iron oxide crystals and aluminum platelets. Particles that are 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. This is highly engineered nano science. It's organic. It's set in a matrix of organic material, oxygen, silica, carbon. Organic material is added to TNT to become more explosive. It's what expands rapidly as a gas and knocks things over. That's how high energy explosives work. Whereas normally the incendiaries work by means of massive heat, 4,000 and 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, about half of that Celsius. So they do some literature study, research, and they find, my gosh, explosive composites based on thermite reactions. This stuff already existed. Lawrence Livermore Laboratory created this stuff. It's called super thermite. Explosive composites based on thermite reactions whose fuel and oxidizer constituents are intimately mixed on the nanometer size scale. You see, when you get these materials that small, at the nanoscale, their surface volume increases exponentially, and you have an instantaneous reaction. So they've engineered an incendiary to become more explosive. And in the peer-reviewed literature, they find that at about 430 degrees Celsius, they ignite, producing a lot of energy, proving that this is an exothermic reaction. Well, that's exactly what all of the samples did that they tested here. They ignite at about 420, 430 degrees Celsius. And so they've proven that it's thermite. It can't be anything else. And what do you imagine is created when they ignite these red-gray chips? Molten iron microspheres. Here shown previously molten because they solidify and harden, with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres found and produced and studied by the U.S. Geological Survey and R.J. Lee. So we know exactly where those previously molten iron microspheres came from. They came from these red-gray chips. As if we didn't know, they're found attached to partially ignited red-gray chips, as you see here and here. So this is a very sophisticated manufacturing process, as you can imagine. It's not made in a cave in Afghanistan. This is made only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratories. And the study in this peer-reviewed paper concludes that the red layer is unreacted thermitic material incorporating nanotechnology. It's a highly energetic, pyrotechnic, or explosive material. It's very clear in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal. This was submitted or published in 2009. It stands uncontested. Nobody's put forth their own peer-reviewed paper to challenge the results of this one. That's how you challenge a conspiracy theory in a scientific literature. So we have all 10 key characteristic features and some very uncharacteristic features with the use of incendiaries for the controlled demolition of this building. It's direct evidence of destruction with incendiaries in the case of Building 7. Fire doesn't create any one of these features, let alone all of them, with additional circumstantial evidence and corroborative testimony, eyewitness testimony. This becomes proof of controlled demolition, a body of proof that has convinced 3,600 architects and engineers to stake their reputations and publicly sign the petition demanding a new investigation into the destruction of all 3 towers on 9/11. And many of them appear in our documentary film series, 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom, an unprecedented film series taking hard evidence of 9/11 crimes to court, where Mick Harrison, the litigation director of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11, and I have in the boardroom in Washington, D.C., presented all of this evidence and much more to a stand-in grand jury. Because this information, this documentary and all of its episodes will be provided to a real grand jury. And we have many ways of doing that. And so we encourage everybody to take part in the series and co-produce it. You can watch the first 2 episodes. They're already produced. The next one will be coming out next week. And you can watch them at 911c2c.org. You can also co-produce the film series because we can't do it alone without you. We have an editor. He is working hard, and he is a 9/11 truth advocate, but he can't work for free. And so we are bringing this. We're in post-production now. We've already filmed everything. So we encourage you to support the project with a $10 donation, a $100 donation, or even a $500 donation will put you on the credits of the film series, every episode, as an executive producer. So thanks in advance for considering that. It's really important because as we consider the evidence at the World Trade Center Building 7, we have to ask ourselves, if that was a controlled demolition, and I believe that we've just proven that it was, then we have to look at the Twin Towers. And so I'm just going to give you a sneak peek right now because I think we've run out of time. But what we have in the way of a hint is both towers shown collapsing is what we're told, but they're obviously being destroyed by hundreds and hundreds of explosions, which are causing upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying structural steel sections weighing 4 and 8 tons each, laterally ejected out of the towers, landing 600 feet up to that far, outside of each tower. So, yeah, this is not a collapse at all. And by the way, what's trailing these structural steel sections? Thick white smoke clouds. What can that be? Office fires cannot be responsible for burning steel, accountable. Steel is not flammable in office fire conditions. So what's trailing these? Well, we looked at the evidence of thermite, one of the byproducts of which was molten iron. The other one is aluminum oxide ash with the thick smoke, which would trail those steel components. So when we move on, we'll be looking at the features of controlled demolition relative to the Twin Towers also. Do we have a sudden onset of destruction in the Twin Towers? Well, let's take a look. The building is at rest, and all of a sudden it is in uniform, smooth, downward motion. There's no jolt or hesitation upon impact of the cold, hard steel below the point of plane impacts. Same thing in the South Tower. It's at rest, and all of a sudden it's in smooth downward motion. Well, this is not congruous with the gravitational collapse that we've been told. What we've been told is that the upper part, in fact, drives the whole rest of the building down to the ground and then destroys itself. This is called the crush down, crush up theory by Zdeněk Bazant from Northwestern University. He produced this and submitted it for peer review just 2 days after 9/11. The rest of us are freaked out. We don't know what hit us. Who did this to us? When's the next plane coming? Not this guy. Apparently he locked himself in his den, producing the key theoretical basis for NIST's column failure theory. So, yeah, we have lots of questions. In fact, it took engineers 10 years to decode this piece of mathematical wizardry. And it starts off by violating Newton's third law of motion, which we talked about just recently, looking for evidence of it. The top part hitting the part below the plane impacts would produce an equal and opposite reaction or destructive force. Take a Mack truck and run it into a Volkswagen. There's going to be some massive damage, right, to the lighter, weaker structure. Does it matter if we drop the Volkswagen onto the Mack truck? No. The lightest, weakest part of a structure cannot possibly destroy the cold, hard, heavier, intact steel below. In fact, take a look at the size of these columns. And they get larger and larger and heavier until halfway down we're 52 inches by 22 inches. And then the steel begins to infill and it becomes almost solid steel at the bottom. Well, let's ask ourselves, what is really happening to the Volkswagen on top? Let's take a look. Is it driving the rest of the building down to the ground? We can see that it's not. Let me make it easier. Look at the lower red line. There is no driving down of this massive section up above. It is being destroyed, like the Volkswagen, in the first few seconds. The first 3-4 seconds, it's gone after that. If it were there, we would see it. None of the photos, none of the videos show an upper part of the building driving the rest of the building down to the ground. If it were there, it would have crushed these few remaining columns standing 600 to 800 feet in the air for about 6 seconds until their base gives way and they fall through the concrete powder that's been shaken off of it. So, something else is going on here, and you can get a hint by looking at it compared, the collapse of this building compared to the explosion of a volcano. Which one is which? Can you guess? Because it is not so easy to distinguish. With upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying structural steel sections weighing 4 to 8 tons, laterally ejected 600 feet away. In this case, with the volcano, it's solid molten objects trailed by thick white smoke clouds. In the case of the North Tower, which is on the left, it's structural steel sections. But it's the same concept. So now we can get a grip on what we're actually seeing, which is say an apple, compared to the orange that NIST tells us it is. In fact, it's not this at all. It's this, with explosions, a massive number of explosions, floor by floor, blowing away the towers, away from the core structure, inadvertently leaving a few of them intact. So let's look at what could have done that. Well, do we have any witnesses of explosions? Yeah. There's 156 of them recorded by the first responders, which were the first responders recorded by their fire commissioner, Thomas von Essen. But this was withheld from the American people till August of 2005. Finally released in the form of, because of the New York Court State of Appeals overturned the city in withholding them, produced 12,000 pages of testimony read by probably no one else but Graham McQueen, who read all of them and came up with 156 of these first responders that are eyewitnesses of explosions. We felt the ground shake. You could see the tower sway, and then it just came down. Again and again, you got to hear the specific order of events. They're seeing something, they're feeling something, they're hearing something before the tower comes down. All of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. It felt like a train running under my feet. The next thing we know, we look up and the tower is collapsing. It shook my bones. Shortly before the first tower came down, I remember feeling the ground shaking, heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. I saw a flash, flash, flash at the lower level of the building. You know, like when they demolish a building? With each popping sound, initially an orange, and then a red flash came out of the building. And then it would just go all around the building on both sides. Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. He saw about 6 of these brief flashes, accompanied by a crackling sound, before the tower collapsed. Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building. Oops. I saw low-level flashes. I saw flash, 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 and then it looked like the building came down. An explosion appeared at the very top, simultaneously from all 4 sides. Materials shot out horizontally, and then there seemed to be a momentary delay before you could see the beginning of the collapse. How specific does Chief Crothers need to be? This expert witness. There was an explosion in the South Tower, one floor under another. When it hit about the 5th floor, I figure it was a bomb, because it looked like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. Seemed like on television when they blow up these buildings, seemed like it was going all the way around like a belt. All these explosions. The building was blowing out on all 4 sides. We actually heard the pops, you know? You heard the pops of the building. I thought the terrorists planted explosives somewhere in the building. That's how loud it was, a crackling explosive. Another loud boom at the upper floors, and then a series of smaller explosions which appeared to go completely around the building at the upper floors. And another loud earth-shattering blast with a large fireball that blew out more debris. The lower level of the building, you know, like when they demolish a building, that's what I thought I saw. Do you see any flashes? I said, yes. I thought it was just me. He said, no, I saw them too. Everybody else, I think at this point, still thought these things were blown up. So I was fully expecting anything else to blow up. You were there when the planes hit? No, I was there when the building exploded. You mean when it fell down? No, when it exploded. Very clear what this firefighter saw. Well, how fast, how symmetrically is the building coming down? Well, actually, at first, the building begins to tip over, the South Tower. So we have asymmetrical damage from the loading on the building below, from this part that's falling off. We have asymmetrical damage from the fires, asymmetrical damage from the planes, broken columns. How in the world, then, do we get complete symmetrical damage down below? All the way around the building, like a belt, all these explosions, just like the firefighters said. That's exactly what we're seeing, and their word is corroborated in the video. Let's zoom into the leading north corner, where we have, in this looped video, at least a dozen explosions very clearly defined, floor by floor, all the way down the building. This is not a nuclear weapon going off, as has been hypothesized by some. This is not energy weapons weakening steel, as has been hypothesized by others. But it could only be a series of pre-placed explosives, accessible because in the floors, because the buildings were only half occupied. So this is definitely, this gave them room and time to place these explosives, which we need to look at also as isolated explosive ejections, called squibs, in the controlled demolition industry, occurring 20 stories down, 40 stories down below the zone of destruction. They even occur as far down as 60 stories down. There's no accounting for these squibs in the official narrative whatsoever. Everything's supposed to be taking place up at the top. Well, on the left side of the South Tower, you see a dozen squibs. What's the word? Coming out at the exact same time on the left as the building begins to tip to the right. Well, these must be destroying the rigid frame of the structural steel system, because it doesn't act as a rigid body and rotate off the rigid body below it and fall onto the ground below. It basically acts more like a liquid and just settles back down into the building below. Well, how fast is it coming down? David Chandler, physics teacher, documents that it's coming down at 64% of gravity. That's about 2/3 of free fall. In other words, it's accelerating, getting faster and faster each second, the definition of acceleration. It's not slowing down when it meets what? 90,000 tons, 80,000 tons of structural steel beneath the point of plane impacts? No, there's more steel on the facade of this building than glass. So we have 47 massive core columns, and we have 240 steel perimeter columns in these sections that are 37.5 feet tall, with 3 columns tied together with spandrel panels, 3 of them. What happens to those? Well, let's look at the feature 7, lateral ejection, and find out. They are impaled in skyscrapers all around the towers, and they're ejected laterally up to 600 feet, destroying the Winter Gardens that far away in the World Financial Center, destroying the Deutsche Bank building such that it had to be disassembled floor by floor. These sections are incredible, and they are ejected laterally, freely flying, as you can see, out of the towers and trailing what? Thick white smoke clouds. Again, structural steel members are not flammable in office fire conditions. Something else is going on here. This one's about to hit building 7. How does gravity work? It works out. And then, gravity works down. This should have gone down, but it's going out. And then gravity begins to take over and you get a 45-degree angle. There's enough energy here to hurl a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. And there's a lot of cannonballs coming out of the towers and well beyond the boundary of ground zero. By the way, Rich, if 100,000 tons of steel framing is distributed outside the tower's footprint, is it also available to crush the building? No, it's not. And that is the real problem for the official narrative. Well, maybe it was the concrete that was crushing the building, because there were 110 floors. We're going to see what happened to them here. They were each an acre in size. 4 and 8-inch thick concrete. 110 acres. Concrete poured on metal decking, supported by lightweight steel trusses. We're looking for 110 of these assemblies. How many do we find? 0. Not 1 acre size floor. Not 50, not 20, not 1. Not even a half acre, quarter acre, 16th acre size floors. Most all of them have been vaporized. In a real pancaking collapse, we see pancakes at the base, like this gravitational collapse in Mexico due to an earthquake. What happened to the concrete? Oh, there it is, pulverized in midair to a fine powder, as a matter of fact. And how could that happen? Well, one thing we know is that when concrete is heated above temperatures like 1500 degrees, this particular study, ASTM C856, says it can turn to white powder. It reduces to its original hydration products: gravel, cement paste, aggregate, sand. So that is a possibility of what happened here, because all the photos and videos show the pulverization of concrete in midair to basically baby powder, 100 micron particles on average. Spread out where? Through lower Manhattan. Well, wait a minute. If the concrete is powderized and spread from river to river, and 30% of this concrete of this dust is concrete in a blanket 3 inches thick, then we have to ask ourselves, was it available to crush the building? No, it certainly wasn't. So this is a third of the weight of the building, each of them. The steel was a third of the weight of the building. Together, that's 2/3 the weight of the building that's not even available to crush the building below. But Zdeněk Bazant used all of that weight in his calculation that he submitted 2 days after 9/11. Not only that, he doubled the mass up above, and he decreased the column energy absorption capacity below by 3 times. That's what the engineers found when they finally were able to decode this piece of mathematical wizardry. It was completely rigged in favor of a collapse, and it remains NIST's key theoretical basis for their column failure theory. It was refuted by the engineers who decoded it, Tony Zambodi, Richard Johns, Gregory Zudolinski, and it was submitted for peer review in the same paper, publication, Journal of Engineering Mechanics, but they wouldn't publish it. Why? They said it was out of scope. Wait a minute. How is it out of scope to publish a challenge to a previously published paper in that same journal? It's not. And that's an ethics violation that was challenged and is now a lawsuit against the American Society of Civil Engineers. So stand by for the results of that. How could they have gotten into the building? Well, maybe under the guise of a fireproofing upgrade, which was going on the months and years prior to 9/11. And interestingly, some of those floors were the same floors hit by the plane. Could there have been nanothermite applied as a liquid under the guise of a fireproofing upgrade? Because we do have intumescent paints, which are applied as a liquid and that are fireproofing. So that's a possibility. Kevin Ryan at digwithin.net examined this and many other important research projects to help give us a clue about what really happened here. If you had access to the core, to the elevators, you'd have access to the core columns and beams throughout the core. But you'd have to saw through about 2 inches of gypsum board on every floor or so to access the core columns. So, interesting. Let's see what the senior database administrator, Scott Forbes, found in the weeks before 9/11.
It was probably the week leading up to 9/11. Every morning I'd come in around 7 a.m. and the dust was incredible. It was filthy. It was like the cleaners weren't cleaning. Right where the windows were, there was a sill which enclosed radiators. I was sick to death of the dust which was appearing on the windowsills. It was dirty grey and very, very noticeable in that week leading up to 9/11.
That's very interesting because they also had an elevator modernization going on the 9 months prior to 9/11. Very interesting. The ACE elevator had this contract. They came out of nowhere to get this contract. Why would the Port Authority have given one of the largest, most sophisticated elevator modernization programs in the industry's history to a small maintenance company contractor with basically just one customer? Yeah, they got this contract from ODYSEE Elevators. Go ahead, Rich.
CIA front, because that's how the CIA operate.
Well, it needs to be investigated, absolutely. This was the largest elevator modernization in the world, documented in Elevator World, March of 2001. Was it the whole thing just a front? Would they have put all that money into something that they knew was going to be coming down? So, yeah, Ace Elevator, by the way, like Larry Silverstein, the owner of the World Trade Center, who had a meeting every morning up at the windows of the world, just happened to miss his meeting that morning due to a dermatology appointment. Well, these gentlemen had another appointment. 50 of them were pulled out to a union meeting to discuss business. And so they missed the whole event also. So we got to ask ourselves, and easily the largest and most perplexing structural failures in history, what happened to the steel? Well, 400 truckloads a day were lined up, starting just 2 weeks after 9/11 and days after 9/11, to cart this steel to the landfill to be put on barges sent to China for recycling, before investigators could get their hands on it and do a proper forensic investigation.
Wow.
This is the illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene, prompting Bill Manning, editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, to cry out, crucial evidence that could answer many questions is on the slow boat to China, showing an astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately, but it didn't. And that's why we have so many convinced that this evidence is the key, particularly the 10 characteristic features, and some very uncharacteristic features, of controlled demolition with the explosiveness here. Direct evidence of destruction with high energy explosives. Fire can't address any one of these features, let alone all 10 of them. With additional circumstantial evidence and corroborative testimony, we find that, in fact, 3,600 architects and engineers find that to be damning evidence, again, making them demand a new investigation, signed publicly onto the petition. And many of them do appear in our documentary, 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom. There's our outstanding documentary, which is classic, 10 years now, 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out. You can watch it for free. We have 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, all laying out the evidence for which we've only been able to highlight today. And the 15-minute documentary just on Building 7, professionally produced for PBS, narrated by actor Ed Asner. And the documentary by Dylan Avery called 7, documenting the work of the Halsey study at the University of Alaska. But all of this evidence is outlined on our brochure. You can download it for free and print it. Give it to every architect and engineer you can find, everybody else that you know. Because we've got to do something, right? The truth about 9/11, as we now see, is dark. And we have got to do something about that. Don't avoid drawing your line in the sand before it's too late. Draw it now. Don't be like this guy, waiting for the next 9/11. So speak the truth about 9/11 now and join us in demanding a new investigation and support those who are speaking to millions every year, many more millions in the 9/11 truth movement. Richard Gage 9/11 needs your support. And so I encourage you to send a donation our way at richardgage911.org. And that's what I wanted to bring to the attention of your faithful viewers. Rich, thank you so much.
Richard, thank you. That was thorough. You have obviously done this before, because I would think of a question and then you would answer the question in the next slide or something, right?
Oh, yeah.
Very, very thorough presentation. And, what I appreciate is the, I suppose, the attention to detail, the forensic analysis that you've brought together in your slides. Now, it's interesting for me as a child protection social worker, I never see abuse. I never, ever see it. What I see are the red flags. And that's what I referenced at the beginning. They found the passports. The steel girders and the concrete got turned to dust, but not the passports. And then I also remember that the Patriot Act was ready within 24 hours. And that was a massive piece of legislation. And there was a similar disaster, I would say, or incident in March 2020, all over the world. And in Britain, they produced an act that was just massive, incredibly long. They couldn't have produced that in 24 hours. It was already made. So then the question that I have that perhaps you may or may answer or may not answer is, who did it? Who did it?
Yeah. Well, who had access to the most secure buildings in the world, right? Probably not Al-Qaeda. Building 7 had all those 3-letter agencies into it, highly secure building. Twin Towers were a terrorist target and had been bombed before in 1993. So we certainly are looking for somebody with access. We're looking for somebody with capability, with the means and the motive.
And capability to make thermite and thermate, to make that available. Like you said, it's not something that somebody can cook up in a cave or in their kitchen or something, right?
Yeah, right.
And then to be able to organize such a incredible undertaking in terms of all the contractors, the non-disclosure agreements that they'll have to sign or whatever, right? Or were they special? And then how it was coordinated that all of a sudden the Patriot Act is ready. And then we're blaming this group of people so that we can then justify something else that benefits the banksters, keeps oil prices high.
It benefits all kinds of parties. The invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq surrounded Iran, Israel's chief enemy. So we have since taken down 6 other countries after Iraq. And that was foretold by General Wesley Clark 2 weeks after 9/11.
Yeah.
Foretold to him by a general in the Pentagon that they'd be taking down Somalia, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and
Iraq.
Sudan. Which one?
Iraq.
Iraq being the first one, wasn't even on the list. But Iran was, and that's the next one. And that's why they're talking about it, the final one.
Yeah. And then so that's a red flag, that conversation that Wesley Clark has disclosed. So there's just so many. And then the Pennsylvania crash, that's a red flag as well. There's so much. And it's not the first time that a government has plotted against its own people in the form of a false flag in order to justify war.
Yeah. Every war has been started with a false flag operation, almost every war. The Vietnam War, World War I, World War II, it goes on and on and on. And here's our next one. And what will be the next one? Will they stage a false flag operation with the excuse to invade Iran?
Well, there's the possible false flag between India and Pakistan. Because
did that just happen?
Yeah, a few days ago. I suspect MI6 in the background running the show.
What actually happened? I've had my head in my work.
There was a terror attack on, I think, 26 male Hindu tourists in Kashmir. Killed. And then that's produced a reaction from India accusing Pakistan of harboring these terrorists. But Britain has a long history of supporting militant insurgents, violent insurgents, in order to, forgive me, Richard, shit stir. And Britain
Yeah.
has a long and noble history. How come as like such a small country was able to rule over a quarter of the world? It's because they did it all through proxies. And they're still doing it through proxies now. And there was a period after, when we had the lockdowns and everything that happened afterwards, that in Britain and Europe, we had many Indians and Pakistanis in positions of power. Varadkar in Ireland, Sunak, Priti Patel, Hamza Yusuf in Scotland. These are all from elite families in India and Pakistan. The proxies for the Raj. There you go, Richard. So which is why it's so important what you're doing for us to speak out, so we can become aware and shine a light on these owners.
Definitely.
Truth emerging.
And I'm encouraging all of your viewers to do just that. Send this podcast, Crypto Rich, to every architect and engineer you can find, everybody else that you know, your elected representatives. We've got to make this happen. And guess what? It is happening here in our country. Senator Ron Johnson has spoken up saying, I'm going to have a hearing on this in the Senate. And he's the one who can. He is the chair of this subcommittee on investigations. Yeah. So very exciting opportunity we have with his participation following Representative Luna's declaration that they're going to get to the bottom not only of JFK, RFK, MLK, but 9/11 as well.
Great. This is what we need. Let truth emerge. Richard, I really, really appreciate it. And I would say to anybody, please go to richardgage911.org, give a donation, share this video far and wide. Even if you don't know any architects or engineers or politicians, you share it with somebody who does know who may know one of those people.
Yep.
Because what we do have in our favor now is they don't control the narrative. We control the narrative through social media, through decentralized social media. Richard, really appreciate it. And thank you so much for taking the time with this fabulous presentation.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Rich.
So Richard and Rich signing out. All the best. Bye-bye.